hey, still here? Of course you don't remember, do you? Well, don't worry. We'll take this at your pace. Let's go back to the start. Understand what happened. I want to talk about Silent Hill, but first I need to talk about stories. Stories move us. Stories are about change, the transition from A to B, where the journey is often more important than the conclusion. The stories that have stayed with me are the ones where we're swept up in the hero's journey, watching our hero grow and subtly change as they're confronted with new ideas and develop as a person, and have to examine their own biases. A story is a transition, a conversation, a metamorphosis. But some stories have already reached their conclusion by the time we begin. No book can ever be truly open-ended. The story's just the words on the page, with the ending set in stone. Even choose-your-own-adventure stories have a limited number of outcomes, and I think that's why fanfiction's so popular. It's a genre of potential, where fans can explore how a character might act in different circumstances, or explore the world in greater depth. Even so, canon will always be limited, and that's okay. If we consider a piece of media to be a closed and finished piece, we can see how the idea of predeterminism can be narratively harnessed through frame stories. A frame story is a story that begins near its conclusion and then flashes back, adding an extra layer to the story we're focusing on, and sets the stage for the main plot. In James Cameron's 1997 film Titanic, Rose tells the audience all about her whirlwind romance with Jack as a young woman, and helps the audience emotionally connect to a century-old wreck and the people it changed. Bram Stoker's Dracula is told through journal entries and letters written after the adventure's over, where the characters can see how everything unfolded and fits together through the benefit of hindsight. In a frame story, the backstory is the story. One of my favourite books is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It begins with our eponymous Victor Frankenstein. Maybe you've heard of him? Close enough. Being pulled out of the ice in the Arctic. Once revived, he tells the bulk of the novel in retrospect, telling both the captain of the ship that saved him and the reader about the events that led him here. But the key idea I want to take from these stories is that we, the audience, know how it will end, yet we're still drawn into the story regardless. We know that the ship will hit the iceberg. We know that no matter how Dr. Frankenstein tries to control his situation, that it will end with him here, alone and stranded in the ice. There's a lot of ice metaphors here. And yet the reader remains engaged and often forgets about the destination of the story whilst delving into the past. I know I did. I could read several chapters and then put the book down to go and start cooking dinner, still mulling over the book, and then it would hit me that, hey, how the heck does this entitled little shit end up at one of the poles of the earth? So I kept reading. Rather than being a spoiler-type situation, beginning in media res sets an ominous tone of foreboding. For this reason, predeterminism is a tool often used by the tragedy genre. What better way to hook an audience's interest than by starting with the fallout of a character's decisions, and then cutting back to their earlier self, poised on the brink of destruction without a clue? Or a writer can create a sense of prophetic doom at the start of the story, such as Macbeth's witches delivering a prophecy which set the events of the play in motion, and drive the characters onward along the thread of destiny. They might strive to reach their foretold rightful place in the world, or struggle to avoid destiny's call at all costs, ironically forcing themselves further down their determined path. It's extremely engaging to watch the cogs of fate turn, while being slowly fed more and more information about the shadowy powers at play. Dramatic irony is an effective tool you've probably seen in a lot of books and shows where the characters are clueless about their fated end, but the audience is all too aware that their apparently inconsequential choices are going to end oh so badly, and it makes the audience laser focused on what might become the vital trigger for their doom. This can also be used to comedic effect, mind you. The Emperor's New Groove is one of my favourite films, and opening the movie with a sobbing llama showing you his human baby pictures is certainly a choice, but it definitely got my attention. And in interactive media, the Stanley Parable has the player walk the line between determinism and spiteful free will, many players opting to do the opposite of what the narrator tells them they're about to do, just to see what happens. Despite the game having a limited number of pre-programmed options, it does a very good job of creating a sense of freedom and avoiding your destined path. Video games are such a wonderful medium for storytelling because they involve the player in a way no other art form can. In games where there are branching paths and choices, it's up to you to guide that character through the game and mould their world as you see fit. But there's a fatal flaw in the system. Pre-programmed branches are fundamentally finite. Games that root their marketing in boasting about their massive range of player options and are choice-driven often feel very railroady and limited. Some games are more subtle about their options, and some let you customize your character rather than the world. They can use a point-based trait system like the Fallout series, or can be faction-based like Vampire: The Masquerade, to let you change how they will interact with the story. Other games straight up give you pop-ups or screen effects telling you that your decisions will have consequences. We know. That was your selling point. But making this the keystone of your marketing often leads to disappointment, because realistically, you can't provide complete freedom of choice. You just can't. A single-player campaign has already been written, and all of the various options are pre-programmed in. And that's not a failing, that's just how games have to physically be. Even something as hugely fluid as the recent role-playing masterpiece Disco Elysium is limited by being a packaged experience that can't be added to. Your dialogue options are pre-listed. You can't type in what you yourself would genuinely say in any given scenario, because how can a programmer account for that? How can a character actively understand and respond to you? I find it strange that there are so many videos out there critiquing games for being so limited and stripping apart their code to prove how limited the choices you made really were. And I think that breaks the magic of suspension of disbelief. To become immersed in a world, you need to accept its limitations, but that doesn't excuse poor writing. Your frame of existence is limited, but a skilled writer can make that space believable and authentic to the story they're trying to tell. The way dialogue is written in any of Sir Terry Pratchett's Discworld books is as good as any stage direction, and it tells you so much about the characters. I mean, look at the way Death's dialogue's written. It has gravitas and is in stark contrast to the rest of the cast's speech, and it probably conjures some form of voice in your head as you read it. Death is alive. Silent Hill: Shattered Memories is an odd duck when it comes to predeterminism, because neither you, nor the character you control, Harry Mason, are aware that the path you walk is set very firmly in stone. Locations can change, characters dress differently and have different attitudes towards you while keeping the same core personality. This was one of the earliest games to implement an obvious and interactive personality test system to determine what sort of person the player is to change the game. Now, it's not great. Some of the changes are purely cosmetic, and some choices, like whether you go into a camera shop or boutique at the start of the game, probably don't actually indicate that much about a person, especially if the player doesn't even see the other shop in the dark, snowy square. Also, the game's very dramatic psychology warning is probably most valuable as a paranoia-inducing placebo, but hey, it's a horror title. Games are often branching to make them more immersive and have the player feel like they're affecting the world so that you're now intrinsically a part of it. But often the climax is something that the main character is affecting, not something about the main character. They're predetermined in the sense that this is a story, and the conclusion is dependent on your choices. It communicates the idea that your choices matter. Shattered Memories' story is predetermined in the sense that it's shaped around the idea of choice, despite your choices being ultimately insignificant. And this is the key to understanding the themes the game is meditating on. It pretends to change to better frighten the player by analysing your behaviour. It pays attention to where you point the Wiimote flashlight, how distractible you are, which objects you examine more closely, and whether or not you make eye contact with NPCs. In reality though, all of the game's reactions to how you play Harry are far more about his narrative arc than about any player scare factor. Harry's designed to be an ultimately malleable character, and not just in the video game sense of being a vessel for the player to slip into. The game opens by switching intermittently between two scenes. The first is a therapist, Dr. Kaufman, pouring himself a drink in his office as he awaits a new patient, and the second is a wildly swerving car in the snow, which eventually crashes, slamming through a fence and into a post. The driver is Harry Mason, a middle-aged author and doting father. In a state of shock, we see Harry weakly unbuckle his seatbelt, push open the door, and pass out in the snow. Before we can assume control, we're immediately bounced back to Kaufman, who thanks us for turning up to the appointment, and mentions that he knows our previous therapists haven't worked out, but he's sure this time will be different. He gives us a short survey about ourselves, and from this initial assessment, the game begins to adapt. The game breaks itself into small chapters by using Kaufman as a sort of progress marker, checking in after each significant event Harry experiences, and subtly preparing you for the major underpinning themes of the next level before returning to the town. Some of it is obvious set dressing, like the colours you choose to use on a picture of a house will be the colours of Harry's home back in Silent Hill, but that's not actually the point of the exercise. The trait the activity's really testing is patience and accuracy. If you colour carefully inside most of the lines, Harry will be confused to find strangers in what he believes is his home, but will keep his temper. But if you scribbled carelessly to get the exercise over with, or just didn't really care, then he'll be aggressive, shouting at the strangers inside and hammering on the door when they slam it in his face, fruitlessly yelling that it's my damned house. Yeah, they call the cops on him. Harry's character's impressionable, always casting out lines for context, and seems like somewhat of a blank slate at the start of the game. When he wakes up from the crash, he only has one key driving trait. He cares about his daughter. That's it. Which, is reasonable considering that his 7-year-old daughter's vanished from the crash site and is outside somewhere in a blizzard, potentially hurt, lost, or with a stranger. He seems dazed and confused after the accident, and in pursuit of his daughter, Cheryl, he wanders into the town, but doesn't seem familiar with the area. Depending on the quiz answers you gave and where you looked in the room, either a pub or diner will be open, and you can talk to an NPC. If it's the Irish pub or sports bar, then you'll talk to the barmaid, who'll inform you that the phones are down due to the storm, and that she's about to shut up shop. She's friendly, offering you a drink, and wants to help you reconnect to Cheryl, but with the phones out, she suggests that you try going home in case you went to a familiar place and is waiting for you. If the diner's open, you'll meet Sybil, the cop, who has a variety of attitudes towards you, but will usually direct you towards home as well, after Harry shows her a photo of Cheryl and his wallet. Sybil pays more attention to his ID, and comments that it looks like he only lives a few blocks away on Levin Street. Harry blearily repeats,
Levin Street, yeah. Yeah, that's where I live.
Uh-huh.
Sybil's concerned that he may have a head injury from his accident, but gets a radio call that needs immediate backup, and says she'll check in on him at the address on his ID, but as we've already covered, when he arrives, it's no longer his home. There's a weird disconnect between the pre- and post-crash Harry, it seems. A bit of good old video game amnesia, but not completely. He knows his daughter, he knows he's a writer and the sorts of things he tends to write, but his surroundings have become completely alien. Even with an address to work from, he needs to look at the GPS on his phone in a fairly small town a couple of streets from his house. Sybil knows the town well, but doesn't know Harry, underlining this by telling him that she's been a cop for 20 years and rode around in her father's patrol car before that, so she's familiar with the local faces. But Harry? He's new. Maybe he just kept his head down. Who knows? She's worried about his potential head injury though, as her own father suffered a similar injury from a punk resisting arrest.
He was never the same after that.
En route to the station after the house fiasco, the storm worsens and Sybil loses visibility, so while she goes to check the state of the road and potentially radio in, Harry takes the opportunity to slip out of the car and out through the woods to loop back into town. Now, I'm not going to run through the whole plot like I did in my Cat Lady video, but I needed to talk about the opening for some initial context. Each area you visit is significant, but not necessarily to Harry. Some places are familiar to him, but some are completely new. We visit the high school he went to, the mall, the hospital, and the amusement park, but for some reason we also need to make our way to a pawn shop and take a boat across the lake to the lighthouse. At the end of each stage, Harry finds something significant, something wrong. Something that's out of place and makes him question how much he actually understands because things aren't quite adding up. Like not recognizing a girl who he apparently knew so intimately that he named her tits. And with each major upset to the mundane, the storm takes over and the world freezes a luminescent blue. A fluorescent labyrinth of ice rearranges the area we've just explored and removes the town even further from Harry's understanding. And with the ice, it quite literally puts him on unstable ground, knocking him off balance. And of course, it introduces our monsters for the game. The Rawshocks. The Rawshocks are weirdly pink, fleshy humanoid creatures that slowly mutate over the course of the game depending on your behaviour and the impressions the game's formed of you. Similar to a Rorschach test. Just a bit more solid. There are 4 distinct variants, but you can get a mix of 2 as well. I've never seen more than that in my own playthroughs or online, but I often find the game profiles me one way, then either mixes another type in, or substitutes it for another one after 2 or 3 sections, after having more time to profile me, which is probably a testament to this being an experimental project. The creatures chase you relentlessly, emitting distorted, high-pitched screeches and wails, grasping blindly for Harry, but always hot on his tail. They're largely featureless, though the feminine variant gives them a mouth with pronounced lips, and their bodies arch and bend in unnatural ways when knocked to the floor. If they grab hold of Harry, they'll swarm him and latch on tight to his back and sides, pulling him down and smothering him, leeching his body heat until he passes out. But they don't tear at him, or scratch and claw, or try to inflict any sort of damage. Instead, they gently stroke his hair or remain on top of him, hugging tight. Very odd. Most horror games try to build a creeping sense of dread through the threat of enemies, or lack thereof. Sometimes you know that they're somewhere in the level, but you don't know where. Games that leave the player vulnerable and weaponless tend to become a violent game of hide-and-seek that keeps the player constantly on edge, ready to dive towards the nearest hiding place at a moment's notice. Shattered Memories is the only game in the series to dispense with weapons entirely, but it also completely does away with the tension of enemies stalking you, because if there's no ice, then there's no threat. Harry's perfectly safe and free to explore as long as the world appears normal. It's a strange choice, and I think it works narratively when you learn the overarching plot, but it does make the safe sections feel lacking. I'm not a genre purist by any means, and it's great to see companies experimenting, but from a gameplay perspective, I think adding some other form of tension into the game, perhaps a timed element, or the child's ghost that follows you around in several areas being unwittingly draining and freezing Harry to death, would have made the game feel more balanced than an all-or-nothing type scenario. There are 4 endings: Drunk Dad, Love Lost, Wicked and Weak, or Sleaze and Sirens. Love Lost is the Harry that prioritises Cheryl above all else. He's warm and family-oriented, wanting to help as many people as he can. You can guess Drunk Dad's priorities from the title. He avoids his responsibilities by drowning his sorrows, telling Cheryl in a home video that no wonder I drink with a family like this. Ouch. Wicked and Weak Harry is spacey and easily distractible. You'll meet him if you don't listen to what people tell you, never make eye contact, and try to shut down social encounters. He loves his daughter dearly, but he's just not there most of the time, and tries to make up for it with lots of gifts, staying away from the house or losing himself in his writing to avoid his abusive wife. And finally, Sleaze and Sirens Harry made the mistake of leaving one of his homemade pornos in the home video collection, it seems. He's a lecherous bastard, proudly cheating on his wife and recording his indiscretions for his own pleasure, but hey, at least there's an ending with Michelle and Lisa. You can probably guess at what sort of things you'll be zooming in on to get this ending. Perv. The 4 types of enemies you can get align with the 4 versions of Harry in each ending. The Drunk Dad produces bloated and swollen Rawshocks that look uncomfortably misshapen, like the insane cancer from Silent Hill 3. The Love Lost Harry, or Goody Two-Shoes, gets creatures that are sliced into geometrical chunks suspended above each other, often with holes punched through their faces, or instead have thick blank slabs for heads. Wicked and Weak gets you spindly stalkers with thin and fragile, almost birdcage-like bodies. There's more emptiness than flesh, and each creature looks easily breakable or only half-formed. And finally, the Harry of Sleaze and Sirens ending gets feminine-looking monsters with swollen lips, breasts, and feet moulded into the shape of high heels, the flesh on their backs rippling into corset laces. For some reason, the game loves to give me the Drunk Dad ending, but never gives me those Rawshocks. I've played the game upwards of 10 times, and they've never triggered no matter what. I can zoom in on as much beer and jockish bullshit as I want, and it always gives me Love Lost or Sleaze and Sirens, which is kind of a funny pair to be stuck between. I've seen a lot of people mocking the monsters for just wanting a cuddle, rather than presenting any real threat or danger to Harry, but again, this is an important narrative choice. And here's where I'm going to ruin the entire premise of the game, so if you like what you've seen of the game so far and the mystery it's been setting up, then amazing. Stop here, go play it, have fun! Still here? Okay, here we go.
I fear for anyone caught between what they know and what they don't yet know that they don't know.
Harry's introduces an amnesiac, paper-thin main character with a single goal: find Cheryl. Why? Because Cheryl needs her father, of course, and she lost him in a car accident 18 years ago. Harry didn't survive the crash, and her survivor's guilt and fraught relationship with her mother left a traumatized child clinging to the idea of a caring father who'd always look out for her. Cheryl fixates on her childish image of her knight in shining armor who'd go to the ends of the earth for her. She scours old home videotapes for frames of him, and this has worked into the game's menu too, as you cycle through options, skipping back and forth between little Cheryl delighted to see her daddy and running up to him, to Harry lifting her up effortlessly in an embrace, waving back at her mother. She clings to a box of mementos, old arcade toys won for her, Barbie dolls and tourist tat from her childhood day trips, which you can find throughout the game, all seemingly contextless collectibles as Harry. She's a daddy's girl, which is even the title of a song for a puzzle solution, and she's clutching at this fantasy image of the perfect father, but Harry was just a person. No matter how you play him, his marriage to Dahlia is either about to end or is unhealthy. Even if you're a perfectly lovely version of Harry, take every opportunity to help others, and are utterly committed to finding Cheryl, he's about to get divorced. He tells Cheryl in the ending video that, even though Mommy and Daddy don't love each other anymore, we both love you, and we always will. Trying to reassure her and shield her from the harsh complexity of adult relationships. No 7-year-old knows their parents the way an adult friend would. Most children only see the nurturing side of their parents when they're very young, and even if their parents are nasty to them, they're still seen as powerful, infallible people who can make and break the rules. If they tell you something, you generally believe it. Children don't know their parents' ambitions, their complex interpersonal relationships, or their grudges. A little girl still views the world egocentrically, and can only relate to big concepts with herself as a reference point. And when her family falls apart and she has to sit with her father's freezing corpse through a snowstorm, she can't process it. There's nobody there for her. She's alone. During the final section of the game, Harry interrupts the last session with Dr. Kaufman, walking into the room wearing the same clothes as the videotapes we've seen of him. Kaufman gives a final speech to us, trying to ground his client in reality, telling her that she's still alive, and her mother's still alive, and that she needs to live that life that she has. Both Kaufman and Harry saying her name in unison. The camera turns to see Cheryl, 25 years old and still trying to work through her father's death with a string of therapists, dissociated and depressed and clinging to the idea of a lost happy childhood. The entirety of the game is Cheryl Mason creating that fantasy father and dragging him painfully closer to herself to close the loop, grieving not just what she lost, but what could have been. Harry's been a source of comfort to her for years. She wants to make him proud of her and can't stand when her mother Dahlia recounts his flaws or she finds tapes that don't match with her perception of him, as that shatters the illusion, or the memories, if you will. There was no avoiding this confrontation. Harry has to find Cheryl to be put to rest, and depending on how you play, Cheryl can either accept her loss as he peacefully freezes over, refuse to give in and hold him tight, or blame him for consuming her childhood with guilt and grief, telling him that it wasn't her fault, his body freezing and breaking into pieces as she's still not fully at peace. The whole game is a Chekhov's gun, and it's only in the final cutscene that you realise it's already been fired. Every time Harry gets too close to something that paints Cheryl in a bad light, petty crime she's committed or being taken advantage of at a party, the world freezes and she sends the Rawshocks out to pull him back into the comfortable dark. He's not the perfect father she thinks she needs, and she's not the innocent daughter anymore either. There's a strange crisis of identity throughout the story, as Cheryl tries to reconcile that she doesn't fit the image her father would have of her anymore either. There are constant asides about someone going to prom without wearing underwear, ghosts of high school boyfriends pressuring a girl for sex at a lookout spot, a naive girl getting drugged at a party, a troubled teen starting an affair with her teacher, being unwittingly photographed and blackmailed. The list goes on and on. Neither parent or child fits Cheryl's inner narrative, and it causes her a lot of distress. The world she creates shuts down, and screaming monsters come out to try and correct it, to hold Harry close and stop him from going any further and seeing the truth. Under pressure, she freezes and retreats to the familiar. Fear is found in knowing. Kaufman's exercises focus on how much Cheryl knows and tries not to know, to forget and compartmentalize. The colours of her old family home, a visceral memory of loss. He asks her to categorize pictures of unconscious people by whether she believes they're dead or sleeping, to force her to look the boundary between life and death in the face. She's told to make pairs of happy couples to see what she thinks will make a successful relationship. But my favourite of these little asides is the story of Princess Celestine and the Bull. 4 figurines are spread in front of Cheryl, and Kaufman tells us that this girl is Princess Celestine, and the boy is Prince Wilhelm. He's passionately in love with the princess, but she doesn't love him. Wilhelm asks King Harold for permission to marry his daughter, and Celestine begs him to say no, but he ignores her and approves the match, prioritizing royal protocol. On their wedding night, Wilhelm attempts to consummate the marriage, but Celestine flees the palace and runs through a field, ignoring the sign that warns of danger, and accidentally startles the bull being kept there. The bull charges and tramples her, killing her instantly. Now, Cheryl feels terrible guilt at her father's death, and in the endings where she tells her father that it wasn't her fault, she immediately follows this with "someone has to take the blame." Perhaps she projected this onto Dahlia, as adult Cheryl knows their marriage was unhealthy and/or coming to its end, and she's immortalized Harry as a saint. Therefore the problem must lie with either herself or Dahlia. And I know which I'd choose if I was a grieving child with survivor's guilt. And if you got the Wicked and Weak ending, it's probably true, as the tape shows Dahlia berating Harry, yelling at him and hitting him in the face repeatedly as he falls to the floor, screaming at him to be a man and fight back. Presumably, little Cheryl was the one filming, being the only other member of the household, and it's easy to see why she'd attach more strongly to her father. Searching for someone to blame is literal in this little figurine set piece, and could be read representatively to some degree. The bull would be placing the blame for Harry's death on the crash itself, or the instigating event as a motiveless tragedy. A bull can't be held morally responsible, and neither can a car, or a snowstorm. Cheryl wants to blame someone, to find some reason for Harry's death, and her gut says that she, as the survivor, must be at fault. But sometimes things just happen. Nobody chose this. It wasn't fate or the machinations of the universe punishing her for not keeping her parents together, even if that's how she felt. That's what Kaufman's trying to tell her with this exercise. Moral blame sometimes isn't a factor, but people need closure and a story to help them resolve their grief, a way to map the events and the reasons behind them, and so sometimes we like to think we could have anticipated accidents or lapses in communication, but that's impossible. We don't have Frankenstein's hindsight or Macbeth's tragic flaw at play here. I've heard people trying to use the words, everything happens for a reason, and God or the universe works in mysterious ways to try and reassure people struggling with loss. But I feel it's a lot healthier to accept that sometimes there is no reason, only chaos. You are not responsible, and you don't need to cast about for a witch to burn or to reject the world at large. We are all here, and one day we will all be gone. And that's okay. Choosing Celestine implies that Cheryl blames herself for the accident. She put Harry in harm's way by association. They were in the car together after all, and she was the one who survived. Perhaps she needed to be picked up from somewhere, perhaps even from Dahlia's house if her parents had already separated, and she wishes that they'd never taken the drive. As is common in young children, she feels responsible for her parents' relationship falling apart, and wonders if she could have changed anything, when in reality, their relationship was probably rife with issues that she knew little about or witnessed without context. This is emphasised by Kaufman's comments in choosing Celestine. He says,
"Poor Celestine. She didn't have to run, right?"
Implying that the whole tragedy was Celestine's own fault for not handling the situation more maturely or allowing Wilhelm to have his way. If you pick King Harold, the man with the power to approve the match in the first place, it could be read as young Cheryl depending on Harry as an authority figure as a child, and continuing to do so as an adult. She's still relying on the idea of him as her, as Kaufman says, knight in shining armour, that would do anything to be reunited with her, even fighting his way through hordes of monsters. In the videotape of the amusement park, he even puts his face in the knight character's portrait, and in the audio recordings he plays up the part, even when little Cheryl asks why he has to kill the dragon. He's a protector, and still takes up an idealistic role in his daughter's coping fantasy. And finally, picking Wilhelm as the culprit implies that Cheryl's ideas about love have been badly damaged thanks to witnessing her parents' failing marriage, and it set her up for poor relationships throughout high school, and possibly beyond. It fascinates me to see Cheryl guessing blindly at what could have brought her parents together in the first place, and seeing the way she represents a younger Dahlia as either combative, flirtatious, or roguish, and trying to understand who her mother was at her own age by projecting her own traits onto her. In the end, she doesn't really know either parent, living or dead. Young Dahlia is never nice, and usually either confuses or aggravates Harry, turning hot and cold seemingly at random, showing Cheryl's lack of understanding of not only Dahlia, but of a loving, stable relationship. Kaufman says, "Poor Wilhelm. If you think he really loved her, he never would have forced the marriage." And we can piece together from the high school section that Cheryl was also pressured and coerced by a boyfriend on multiple occasions to have sex, despite knowing she was uncomfortable. She repeatedly tells him no, pushing him away in recordings and begging him to stop. Eventually he leaves her because she's too frigid. This causes her to attach to a safer male adult, her teacher. A relationship that should have been purely fantasy and one-sided, but ended up becoming physical, leading her peers to bully her further, taking photos of her naked in the showers and with her teacher in the car. Teenagers often develop crushes on unavailable people, like teachers or celebrities, because they know deep down that the relationship is impossible, and it gives their hormonal brains a sort of practice run for a real relationship. It's a delicate and uncomfortable stage of puberty that should never be taken advantage of by the adult party. But unfortunately for Cheryl, that wasn't how it worked out. She wants to be loved and feel secure with an adult man, but this wasn't the relationship that she needed, and only added to the damage of past traumas, leaving her with more guilt and self-hatred at getting herself into these situations. Speaking of trauma, I want to quickly run through the 4 F's of trauma typology. You probably know of fight or flight, the aggressive response and the oh shit run response, and Harry's panic sprints through the ice gate definitely seem to be flight. But there's also fawn and freeze. Fawn is the response that makes you compliant, hoping that if you can just appease the person threatening you and keep them happy, then maybe, just maybe, they'll calm down and leave you alone. If you're a good girl, then maybe Daddy will stay. If you get Daddy another beer, he'll stop being nasty. If you're quiet, then maybe Mommy will stop shouting. Freeze is the equivalent of playing dead. Just shutting down, whether that's physically freezing in terror like a deer in the headlights, or emotionally, becoming completely apathetic and unable to connect to your emotions so you can get through the stressful situation. Adult Cheryl embodies the freeze response, which is why her other world is made of ice. She's depressed and doesn't want to allow herself to process her grief and the other damaging events in her life, because that would mean having to feel the emotions associated with them. It's terrifying to her. She's trying to preserve or freeze an era of her life in place and clings to it, building literal, towering cold walls. She's tried to distance and ice her mother out of the picture as well, but only ends up isolating herself further. Even the box art of the game is a picture of a young Cheryl frozen on a swing, an image of innocence turned eerily uncanny. Cheryl knows deep down that she's unhappy and needs to face her past, and so consents to see yet another therapist, but still doesn't really want to feel her emotions. Why would she? It's like being told to stick your hand in a fire. You know it's gonna hurt, and all your instincts and learned experiences scream, no, 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 this is bad. Perhaps Dahlia pressured her into it, worried for her daughter's future, or Cheryl's quality of life is finally dropping so low that she decides to grit her teeth and push through anyway. But the important thing is that she goes. Just turning up shows you commitment to the process. She doesn't want to look at her grief, doesn't want to see her loss, and makes her own monsters to stop her fantasy father from dissolving back into a memory. But she has to, and she knows that. The whole game is the raw, agonizing balance point between acceptance and denial, knowledge and innocence, and Cheryl's undecided which side to lean towards throughout the game. Your choices are the ones that tip the scales towards her recovery or continued denial, and though Harry's fate has already been sealed, there's still hope for Cheryl, and choice in determinism. Thank you for watching. I've loved this game for years, but I rarely see anything positive said about it. It was a pleasure to replay, especially with the added benefit of hindsight. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Voidburger for letting me borrow some of their Rawshocks footage. There's a full Let's Play with commentary over on their channel if you fancy taking a deeper look at Cheryl's case. I'll see you soon.